Good evening and welcome to the People's Business. I'm Wendy Burke. This evening we'll be discussing the topic of harassment, and in particular harassment against women. To help me in this topic, I have three panelists this evening. They are Dr. Daniele Bobb, a lecturer at the University of the West Indies Institute for Gender and Development Studies of the Nita Barrow unit, Ronelle King, the Director of Life in Leggins, and Mr. Jermaine Beckford, Head of Projects, Men's Empowerment Network Support, just to have that balance. Well, I want to welcome all of our viewers this evening as we will look to delve into tonight's discussion. There's legislation, but there's still harassment. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to the People's Business Live. We're looking at the topic harassment. Well, some may say that is nothing new to Barbados, but recently it's been out there and we're realizing it's having an impact on various sectors of our community. One area is tourism. So let's just put the discussion in context now and let's watch this report from Crystal Hoyt.
The issue of harassment on the streets in Barbados has been brought to the fore once more, this time by visitors to the island. 3 people who came here on the Welcome Stamp program say they were forced to leave due to sexual and homophobic harassment. Last month, Andrea Lowe returned to her home in Hong Kong, months ahead of her scheduled departure. She says the harassment and constant catcalling was overbearing.
Someone walking past and making a comment, and a driver driving by and making a comment, it's not comfortable. Every time I went to a beach, I would always get a lot of unwanted attention. There would always be men who would come up to me. I remember one of the first times it happened, I specifically said, I'm actually fine on my own. And then this guy who was talking to me, he seemed to get really upset by that, and he came closer and sat right next to me. The other thing that made me decide I wanted to leave is, people saying to me that this is just part of the culture here and you have to get used to it. And I really felt like that wasn't something I was prepared to do.
Ronelle King, founder of the Life in Leggins movement, says sexual harassment has unfortunately been normalized as part of the Barbadian culture.
Sexual harassment is a prevalent issue here in the country and as well as the region. It is something that local Barbadian women have been experiencing for quite some time now and speaking out against as well. But there have been studies as well as it relates to visitors and the type of harassment that they experience.
Lowe's story made rounds on social media and resulted in another visitor to the island sharing their experience on an international travel website, where he says anti-gay slurs were repeatedly hurled at him and his male friend, despite the fact that neither of them identify as gay. Minister of Tourism Senator Lisa Cummins says harassment, whether sexual or homophobic, has no place in modern Barbados.
Whether it's a local or a visitor, the experiences that have been recounted are simply unacceptable, and they really have no place in a modern Barbados. And I'm looking forward to us having a meaningful conversation about change globally, locally, and at the level of our homes as well, that would stamp out the root of this type of behavior.
Crystal Hoyt.
Well, that set the stage for us. Let's now have our panelists weigh in on the discussion. Dr. Bobb, if I could start with you and what you at the Gender Studies Unit perhaps define as sexual harassment.
Good night, Wendy, and good night to my fellow panelists. It's very good to be here. Uh, this issue, it has been one of concern for a very long time for us, very, very long time. And when we look at sexual harassment, it's just part of the broader umbrella of gender-based violence, especially against women and girls.
Yes, Dr. Bobb, you seem to have froze there a bit, but maybe we can toss to you now, Danielle. Yes, you were part of that extract we just showed, but tell us for you, how widespread would you put it on a scale of 1 to 10? Yes, I realize Dr. Bobb is back, so I'll just let Danielle weigh in and then we'll come back to you, Dr. Bobb. On a scale of 1 to 10, Danielle, where would you put it? Danielle?
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Bob,
she seems not to be hearing me. Okay, Dr. Bobb, you can continue. Hello, Dr. Bobb?
Hi, I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
Yes, you had froze for a bit there and I was throwing to Danielle, but she seems to be...
I'm Danielle.
Sorry, Ronelle is who I was referring to. Sorry. Yes, Dr. Bobb, you can continue from where you left off. You were saying that UWI places it within the spectrum of violence against women.
Gender-based violence, yes, specifically against women and girls and vulnerable groups. And it really has to do with the unwanted attention, the kind of objectification of a woman, of her body, of a young girl as well. And, having slurs thrown out, the catcalling, the street harassment, the jokes, some of our own cultural slangs we have that we speak about, look, put a smile on your face, look at that Oxy, she's right, those kinds of things. When you're relating it to, one's body and thinking about it as in a way that is pleasurable for a man, then you have that form of harassment becomes harmful and very much unwanted and creates a lot of fear in a lot of our people, or
Okay.
women and girls particularly.
Ronelle, do you agree with this, that it creates a great air of fear as we as women walk the streets?
Absolutely. Women recount their experiences and talk about how they become very hypervigilant, how they try to change their clothing because they believe that if they do so, it would lessen the amount of harassment that they experience, which is proven to be not based in fact, and trying to change the way that they walk in terms of the directions they take, the roads that they take to lessen the amount of harassment. And it has come to the point where we're having conversations or when they, even if a man opens the door for them, they don't say thank you. They just keep moving. They act so they don't hear it, because just to say simple things as thank you opens the door for the man to try to harass them. So it's a widespread issue, and it's an issue that creates a lot of fear in women to the point where they're very uncomfortable in their own country and in public spaces.
Okay, on that note that you just brought up, I want to throw to the gentleman, because you were talking about the issue of opening a car door. Most of us will see that as a sign of chivalry, that there's still some gentlemen in the population, but women might ignore it and not want to proceed for fear that it may lead to something else. Do you think this is the situation, Jermaine? How is it?
Okay, well, for me, I can say 100% that I am a total gentleman. And if I attempt to open a car door for a lady, it would be a lady that I know or that has asked me to open a car door for her. I want to weigh in a little bit more on this issue of harassment because coming here representing the Men's Empowerment Network support, I want to emphasize that harassment also actively happens in Barbados against men. So, you have men on men harassment, You have female on men harassment, and then there is also a serious epidemic in Barbados now of female on female harassment. Right, so I need to get that out there, and as part of this discussion tonight.
That's interesting. So in the middle of it all, though, it's the women. Not that it doesn't happen to men. I do know of situations where what we would define as cougars would tend to hit on younger guys. They're terms. I'm sure Dr. Bobb is familiar with them, and we accept it as a part of our culture. That's how our society's always been. But the question is, can we look at it from a cultural standpoint and say it's okay, it's happened for years?
Okay, so for me, let me start by saying that any form of harassment is wrong. The Men's Empowerment Network support as an educational advocacy group for men. We try to, one, encourage men to do the right thing. We recognize that persons are uncomfortable at times based on the interaction they may have. And I want to say this. There's a very thin line between trying to more or less do what is seen as a norm or what a man should do and harassment. And you, as a man, we as men, we must be able to define that line and ensure that we do not cross that line. Because I want to speak about something very real. That harassment in Barbados at times also leads to other serious offenses being predicated against our females and also our males. So, we at the Men's Association, we vociferously preach against it. We want everyone to live in harmony, and we want our females and males in Barbados to feel safe, no matter if they're walking in their house, they're walking on UWI campus, or just walking on the streets in Bridgetown, because we understand how serious this issue of harassment is in Barbados. And as I said, we preach against it vociferously. We are not in any way in favor of any harassment of either males or females in this country.
I want to throw to you on this, Ronelle. Do you think that there's enough support from men in trying to discourage their counterparts from harassing women? Do you find that individuals, say we're liming on the corner and one starts it, do you find that there are enough in the group who will call out that friend and say to them, you know, you're wrong for speaking to her with that sort of tone or using that language. She's not offended you in any way. Why are you doing this? Do you think men actually try to help each other change?
I think that some men do, but generally, no. Because they could be socially sanctioned by the group for doing so. For harassment for some men, it is a performance of their masculinity for other men. You know, they may personally disagree with it. They would probably not do it on an individual level when they're not with their friends, but to perform, masculinity, to show that, they are straight, they are subscribing to the notion of hegemonic masculinity, that they're going to do it in front of their friends. And so to call it out would be to basically other themselves to challenge, the group, essentially. That I don't often hear of them doing so. I don't often see them doing so. But they would probably walk away and say, it made them feel uncomfortable, but they would not challenge their friends.
Okay. Dr. Bobb, have you done any studies in recent times on this issue? And if so, what have some of your findings been? Do you find that men encourage it wholeheartedly? Maybe it's sometimes misplaced or misinterpreted by women. What's the unit been finding?
So the unit has done a lot of research broadly on gender-based violence, particularly on intimate partner violence in the region. And we've been working with development agencies like UN Women, who've been doing a lot of work. You may know of the Spotlight Initiative in the Caribbean now that is taking on the issue of gender-based violence at the regional level. But I want to say our perspective is very much gendered, and we see sexual harassment as a gendered uh, issue or problem. And let me explain a little bit. When we talk about gender, people tend to think we're talking, just men and women. But we speak about gender as referring to these systems of relationships, social relations of power, of domination. And it's through those that we are then, as men or women, able to access certain kinds of resources, whether it's be jobs or status or other types of resources. And so there are certain beliefs or myths that we have about how a man should behave or how a woman should behave, and who they are, what are their expected kinds of ways of being and doing things, and those inform then their access to those resources, their livelihoods, how they live their lives. For example, we talk about women should be pursued. Women are seen as the weaker sex; they require protection, and we see men as men are supposed to be hypersexual. They're protectors. They're supposed to be the one pursuing the women relentlessly. And when you have an issue like sexual harassment, we have to ask the question: upon whom is fear of harassment inflicted? And the research and the studies show that it's mainly women and girls that you'll find that fear. They're the ones that are the victims of this kind of harassment. And then we ask ourselves, who is the one inflicting this fear? And that that's how we know who has the power, right? So who feels safe enough to behave in a particular way, and who feels unsafe or vulnerable, and that in turn shifts their behaviors and how they make a life for themselves. So relations of gender, the way when we analyze it, are also relations of power, and that they organize um, our societies. So the structure of our societies are based on those relations of gender and relations of power, and they produce these inequalities that we are seeing, or that we have. So when we talk about sexual harassment and who is who's the victim, the primary victim, we have to think about why are they the primary victim, and what are the thoughts or beliefs behind these actions that position these women to be so uncomfortable. So there are many studies, and statistics is often very scarce in the Caribbean, especially around this issue of sexual harassment. But you will
Is it
find on, yes.
what I want to question now? Is it that the statistics are scarce because people will not say want to report harassment on its own, the verbal attack, but maybe will only wish to report it if it gets to that physical level, where because I've refused to acknowledge your catcalling or your comments about how my body looks or what you would or would not like to do with me, I've walked away, so we assume nothing, no harm has been done to us. But it is only from when the person leaves and actually tries to touch us or block us from going our way that we might wish to file a report. Do you think that's why the data is not as wide as it should be?
It could be, but you also have to, people have to, there has to be a law, right? You have to have legislation under which somebody can say, all right, my rights are being infringed, or this is illegal. So you have to have legislation around that. People have to be educated around these different forms. And we have to start questioning our own thought processes about what is acceptable. And we tend to say, oh, this is our culture. Because even in the video that you showed, and you look at the comments and you hear a person saying that's how it is for us, and it's not just men in Barbados. And that's true, it's not just men in Barbados, but we should not then excuse it and say it is our culture. We have to shift that, we have to
Okay.
change that, we have to question that, and we have to force ourselves to rethink why we are so complicit in accepting that as culture.
And we'll answer and ask all those questions when we return. We'll return with Dr. Daniele Bobb, Ms. Ronelle King, and Jermaine Beckford here with us on The People's Business discussing the topic of harassment. When we return, you can call us here at The People's Business. We'll be back in a moment. Yes, we are standing by for callers 228-5562 and 228-5563. Now, before we left off, Dr. Bobb was saying that we need to be questioning. Well, there's a question I want to look at now because she's saying culture is not an excuse. However, we're now in a situation where the majority of Barbadian homes, fortunate or unfortunately now, tend to be single parent, mostly women. And a lot of us are raising boys. I myself am raising 3 boys. Is it something where maybe we are acculturing them, Jermaine, with this sort of belief that to be masculine and to be macho, there's no harm in doing it?
Could you repeat that question?
No,
again?
I
Sorry.
was asking you based on the fact that a number of our households are now primarily led by women. Are we
Yes.
as women not also guilty of ingraining this mindset into some of our males?
I would have to say yes. The truth is, I know a lot of women. I meet a lot of women who, as you said, are single women raising children on their own. And what I'm going to say here, I might become a little bit unpopular for, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. You meet a man, you decide to get with a man, you have seen what the man has done to other women, and you are seeing what the man is doing to you, but you continue in the relationship with the man and then expect a different outcome from him based on his past. The truth is, you have to accept, I think that women have to accept some form of responsibility when they find themselves in that situation. But saying that, I will also make the point that when a child comes into the situation, it is up to both the male and the female in the relationship to step up to the plate, because the honest truth is that the child did not ask to be here. And when the child is here, it is then up to the parents to find a way and come together and raise that child together in the best interest of that child. All right. So, we can blame the women partially, but men also have to take the blame where it's necessary, because you can't shirk your responsibility as a father, vice versa, you can't shirk your responsibility as a mother.
Okay. Can I hear from Ronelle and Dr. Bobb on this same topic? Are we encouraging our young males to be part of the stigma, be part of the cycle, continuing the harassment?
Um, I guess the way that I'm saying it, I disagree. Um, one of the things that stood out for me is in 2017, we would have had a march against sexual harassment where Barbadian women and women in 6 of the Caribbean countries took to the streets. And on one of the placards, and I remember it said, respect all women, not just your mother. And so, men, a lot of the men have, they recognize the women in their lives, they respect the women in their lives, the women that they care about, but then they have a different, approach to other women that they have an interest in or that they find attractive. The way that they approach them is not how they would approach women that they respect, or how they would approach women in front of the women that they respect. And I know of women who've ingrained in their sons, how to respect women, how to approach women. And then when they go out and they meet their friends, they're socialized completely different, because you're not just socialized from your home, you're socialized from your environments. And so they try to fit in, they do what they see the other boys doing, and they're afraid to step out of this box that they've been forced into, performing their masculinity.
And speaking of boxes and stepping out, let's go to our caller on the line. Good night and welcome to you. Your question. Caller?
Hello?
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 I'm hearing you faintly. Go ahead.
My name is Velma Newton, and I'm calling in my capacity as Director of the Impact Justice Project, which is being implemented from the Cayfield campus, and it is being funded by the Government of Canada. A few years ago, Impact Justice drafted a bill, sexual harassment bill, which has been with the CARICOM Secretariat for the past 3 years or so for comment from around the region. But we realized, in doing our research, that it was not enough to have a bill which just dealt with sexual harassment in the workplace or in any such limited circumstances. And therefore, our definition of sexual harassment, and it has been reproduced in the Jamaica legislation of the same name, makes sexual harassment include unwelcome sexual advance towards a person, unwelcome requests for sexual favors from a person, unwelcome sexual comment to a person, unwelcome sexual gesture, contact, and unwelcome sexual images or graphics, or unwelcome audio of a sexual nature, and showing pornography, or any other unwelcome physical, verbal, or nonverbal contact of sexual nature. In other words, it is extremely wide, and it captures most of the areas in which, especially women, complain of sexual harassment. And there can be consequences in that you can be taken to court for that sort of behavior.
Okay, Professor Newton, we have heard your comments, but what I found interesting was you said that it's been 3 years now. When will it come to fruition, and when will we be able to see it across the region? Oh, okay. Professor Newton, don't listen to the television, just listen to the telephone. My question to you after your statement was that you said it has been 3 years now since you've been working on this policy, this legislation, and I'm asking you how long before it is enacted, before it will actually have some teeth to be able to do those in the region who are harassed, females and males, as Jermaine would have said, some good.
Sexual comment to a person, unwelcome sexual gesture, contact,
Okay, she's not hearing us. Have our panelists heard what she had to say? Do you think legislation alone can get us where we need to be, even if it is that wide-reaching?
Absolutely not. We need a lot more than just legislation, because we do have the Sexual Harassment Act in the workplace here in Barbados, and we still the frequency of that in the workplace continues. You need monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. You need a shift in people's thinking and their mentality. I mean, going back to the question you asked before, we are living in a patriarchal system, so we cannot blame mothers, um, and that even blaming mothers, we again are reproducing the inequality we're talking about. So we are assuming that it's only that it has to be women who are parenting children, and so we blame them. But that's a different topic
Yes,
for
another
another
discussion.
time.
We have a caller
But to
on the
think
line.
about
Yeah, so just hold that comment a minute. Good evening to you. They're on the People's Business. We're discussing harassment.
Good evening. And good evening to our guests and all our listeners and viewers. I grew up in the 60s in the city of Bristol, New Orleans. And on the evening, we used to go up Baxter's Road around 2:45 to about 5:30. And we would call what we would call trouble the girls. But today it's probably called harassment. But back then, that was more of a pastime rather than interfering with the females. The reason why I say that, the police station is just down the road from Baxter's Road. And if any of those ladies go down there and make a complaint, the layman done. So we didn't want that. So we had to actually control ourselves. And another reason too that I feel today that there's so much harassment, we were never under the influence of alcohol and drugs. It was just a passing. And today you got a lot more outdoor drinking than indoor. Because back then you used to mostly drink in shops. And as they say, it wasn't enough alcohol and drugs, and majority of the guys who drink were mostly older guys. And it just was a Monday to Thursday thing. Because you see Friday and Saturday, the guys looking for money to get in theater. So it was just a pastime. But unfortunately, today it gone out of hand, I think, due to outside influencing culture that permeates in our society. And it really is out of hand. But as they say, back then we used to call it trouble in the girls, not harassment.
Panelist Wayne, he says he's from the 60s and he believes it's been imported. Has it?
Okay, so if I can weigh in a little bit here. I listened to Professor Newton, and she was speaking about the proposed legislation which is in CARICOM now. And I listened to the guy just now saying, in essence, that what is happening now is important. Now, I want to agree in principle with him that some of what is happening now is important because, I mean, obviously we have televisions, you listen to all these different TV networks, you read, you have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, there's hypersexualization of our males and females. But the problem that I have, and listening to Professor Newton, the problem I have is this. We are getting dangerously close to a threshold based, and especially on that legislation that's being proposed, where any form of interaction between a male and male and male, or female on female could be considered as harassment. And I think what we as society need to do is to pull ourselves back a little bit and come within reason and common sense.
Okay, Jermaine,
Everything.
I'll
Hi.
let you finish your reasoning and your common sense after we take this commercial break to make some dollars and cents. We'll be back in a moment.
Okay. Yeah.
Head of projects with the Men's Empowerment Network support. Okay, Jermaine, you stopped at the point where you were saying that as men, and as a society, we may need to pull ourselves back. Continue your point.
Yes, right. So as I was indicating, I was listening to the proposed legislation by Professor Newton. And we can't have a situation where every single form of interaction between a male on male, or female on female can be considered as harassment, whether it be in person, will be phone, via WhatsApp, Facebook, or whatever. I mean, the reality is this. As I said, we need to bring ourselves within reason and common sense. We must understand where the line is drawn, where there's unwanted attention and unwanted I guess, as you call it, catcalling, the harassment, whatever it is. But we cannot, as a society, train our young boys and young girls that, okay, if you do this, that's harassment. So we can't stop communicating with one another, right? What I think needs to happen, and I will say this on this program tonight, it start from inside of the homes. Mothers and fathers need to be mothers and fathers again, not the television, not your next door neighbor. You as a mother need to be a mother to your son or daughter, and as a father you need to be a father to your son or daughter. Vice versa, when children go into schools, teachers have to take responsibility for their part, and society has to be a whole of society approach. Legislation will in no way stop harassment. I think in some ways, legislation that is being proposed will cause harassment to increase, right? At current, there is sufficient legislation on the books. I think we are overly legislated. And, we can operate within the confines of the legislation and ensure that persons stick to the letter of the law. And if any person, male or female, feels that they are being harassed in any way, they go to the Royal Barbados Police Force, make a complaint. And what I will add is that the Royal Barbados Police Force needs to take some of these complaints more seriously than people come to them from early. I will concede that.
I agree with you on that point as well there. Let's continue to our other two guests now. We have with us Ronelle King, Director of Life in Leggins, as well as Dr. Daniele Bobb, a lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. Okay, we have a caller on the line. That's our panel tonight. Good night to you.
We can't stop communicating one another, right? What I think needs to happen, and I will say this on this program tonight.
Good night, caller. Kindly listen to your telephone and not to your television. In fact, if you can turn it down so we don't get the feedback, that would be appreciated. Our topic, harassment. Good night, caller. Okay, the person seems not to have gone. Let us continue on this topic. Jermaine brought up a number of points there saying that we can over-legislate and we will never get it covered. Do either you, Ronelle, or Dr. Bobb agree with this?
I'm going to let Daniel go first, and then I'm going to
Okay.
answer.
Yes, I do think we need more than legislation. I think that's what I was saying before. We do need a shift in our thinking, and we need a kind of societal shift, a change in our structures as well. Because I'm going to say clearly, any interaction you have, there is a power dynamic. But that power dynamic differs. If it's man on man, there's a certain dynamic that's there, and oftentimes those are in the legal books. Certain behaviors are criminalized, and you can deal with that differently. If it's a case of, let's say, sexual harassment in the street, in the public space, again, that is a different kind of dynamics that's taking place, especially usually the perpetrator is a man, and it's usually a woman or a girl that's being harassed. And so there's a different type of dynamic, and the access to the kind of justice or even the police support is much different. Oftentimes police, they do not take it seriously, yes, but often that has to do too with how are they going to report it, under what kind of legislation, how are they going to process this. But there needs to be also a training around these issues. How do you deal with these matters? What can be put in place to deal with these matters? And so we have to be able to say it's not just about teaching our children in the home, but it has to be the state, because look, our young people are looking on to see how is the state addressing this issue of harassment. Now they're fully aware of what's taking place in social media, so they're
Yes,
fully
they are.
aware of this issue, and they're looking to see how are our government officials responding to this. Is this a serious matter? Is this something that can be brushed off? And
Okay,
if not,
Dr.
they take
Bob,
it
I
as a
just want to
joke.
go to a caller that's on the line now. Good evening to you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for having me on to the session. Now, I just want to share my perspective on something that I heard come up earlier, and I think it's important when we're having this discussion for everyone to check, their privilege and engaging in certain spaces. When we speak to the fact that there's no need for improved legislation around, protecting women and harassment, it leaves us in a place where women are then left defenseless. Because if we then stick to where we were before in terms of legislation that was there before, even before Life and Leggins took to the streets, we saw that it was ineffective then, and there's necessarily a gap that needs to be filled in. So I think there's a wider conversation that needs to be had about, again, the roles of parents and the family in teaching and training boys and young men what it means to be a man in society. And the definition that we have today is a type of aggressive approach to masculinity. You must be rough, you must be tough. If there's a girl and you're interested, you must pursue her relentlessly. And the narrative around, we're moving on this slippery slope towards every and anything being regarded as harassment, I find that a bit, disingenuous, especially when you look at the fact that when a woman says, no, I am not interested in this attention, and even without saying no, there's certain bodily languages and cues that you can notice. A man, we must teach our men and young boys to notice these cues and be able to say, okay, I need to step back and not approach any further. So just to the panelists, I wanted to hear your views in terms of the redefining of masculinities and how that can help us to change this conversation around harassment.
Ronelle, would you like to take this?
Absolutely. I think I agree there needs to be a gender transformative approach as it relates to engaging young men and boys on, how they perform masculinity and, the same power imbalances that Dr. Bobb has spoken about, and how, these gender norms, these harmful stereotypes and practices that do result in violence against women and sexual harassment, we need to have that conversation. We need to engage them in a way that they understand, again, their privilege, how their actions impact women and girls, and how to cultivate healthier relationships between men and women, men and other men, men and children, men and themselves, going on and so forth.
Okay, the issue so far that we've been focusing on in terms of who can help to change and redress what is going on now has been the family. However, what role do the other socializing agencies within the society have to play? What role can the church play? What role can our education system play? What role can the mainstream and even social media play in getting this shift to come about?
I think even the HFLE program, comprehensive sexual education, is important to understand the simple things as consent. Consent is one of the basic understandings of how these issues play out. If there's so many conversations around young men and boys where the topic expands from harassment to sexual coercion to rape, and they are unable to explain what consent is, or they would not see themselves as perpetrators because they have of this type of violence, because the idea of a perpetrator for them is this boogeyman that jumps out of the dark at night, this caricature of a predator. And so, I think we do a disservice to the youth, especially by pushing this abstinence teaching on them and not engaging them, understanding, simple things as consent.
Okay.
Yes.
Callers, to just a second, Dr. Bobb, there's a caller on the line, just reminding them of our call numbers, 228-5566 662-228-5563. Good evening to you, caller. How can our panelists help you?
This is Velma Newton here. I had made some comments earlier, and I was trying to get back to you to speak on a number of issues that the panelists had with my contribution.
Okay, go right ahead.
Yes, what I wanted to say is that impact justice does not think that what is only needed to deal with sexual harassment is legislation. Of course, you need to do some sensitization, and young men and whoever the harassers need to be taught from early that there's certain behaviors that are not acceptable. But at the end of the day, what if you do not have legislation in place and it continues? How are you going to stop it? That's the question I would like to ask. I had mentioned that we had a bill before the CARICOM Secretariat for a long time, and I believe that some of the pushback against it might be some of the same issues being raised tonight on the program, is that some people might think that it is going to prevent normal interaction between men and women or girls and boys. But that is not so. It speaks about unwanted and unwelcome behavior. Unwanted and unwelcome behavior is behavior that whoever the let's say victim, for want of a better word, does not want. So it can't be behavior that that interferes with normal relations.
Okay. Before we left off, you'd wanted to weigh in on something else, Dr. Bobb.
Oh, sorry. I'm glad Professor Newton called back and spoke, because I think the previous caller also misinterpreted the conversation. It's not that we're saying there's no need for legislation. We're saying we do need that. Absolutely, we need that. We need more also. And so your follow-up question around the kinds of institutions, I just want to say these ideologies that inform these harmful behaviors that we're discussing now are enshrined in these institutions: the church, the school, the family, our legal systems. So a lot of what we are fighting against is also our mentality, our beliefs, our value systems, what are passed down throughout that we've just accepted and have not questioned and said, well, this is how it has always been, so live with it. And what we're saying, no, we have a human right to be traversing the public space in peace. We have a human right to be walking and not having anyone shout at us or tell us how we look or sexualize us in any kind of way. And I don't see that as asking too much. It's your basic human rights. And for women and girls, especially, that is infringed on daily. There's so many examples of women saying, I have to just time when I go to the shop or when I leave home. I have to police what I wear. I have to just be, it's all, that is worrying. That's a burden, and it's a mental anguish that a lot of us have been living with for a very long time. And so we can't say this is how it's always been, but we have to say, we have to begin to look at these beliefs and how they're embedded within a patriarchal system, of domination, where we are saying one group of person dominates or have power over another, and therefore they're able to inflict these kinds of, or police the space that that person operates in. And therefore we have to think about where our beliefs come from and address those at a fundamental level, while we are still putting in place the legislation, changing the behaviors, getting things done so that persons know how to communicate. Simple forms of communication. You
Yes.
don't have to be catcalling somebody to get their attention. Go up and have a conversation.
I'm glad you stopped on that one, because when we come back, I want to put to you a scenario, Dr. Bobb. But we're going to break here now. The People's Business Live, we're discussing the issue of harassment. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to the People's Business. Tonight we are discussing the topic of harassment against women. To help me, my panelists, Dr. Daniele Bobb, lecturer at the University of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow unit at the UWI Cayfield campus, Ronelle King, who's the director of the Life in Leggins organization, and our lone male, Jermaine Beckford, who's the head of projects at the Men's Empowerment Network Support. Now, before we went off, Dr. Bobb, you were raising the issue of, one, girls being harassed, and the issue of being unable to have a regular conversation, to just be able to approach a female to say, good afternoon, you look nice, what have you. Scenario. Oh, okay, before I paint that scenario, we have a caller on the line. Caller, good evening to you.
Yes, good evening. My name is Sam Licorice. I've been listening to the program, and I agree that harassment and sexual harassment should be legislated. However, sexual harassment should not be subjectively determined, but objectively defined or decided. I'm hearing from the proposed legislation that the word unwelcome and unwanted are being used a lot. Whilst I like the definitions in principle, I think that the unwelcome and the unwanted is a little bit too subjective. You know, how am I going to know if my interest in a woman is unwelcomed or unwanted unless I try? I have to try. And if I try and she rejects me, she might reject me the first time because, well, she doesn't like my hair on this occasion, or she doesn't, like my look on this occasion. I might see her next week and I might try again, and I might be successful. So I think that we need to avoid as was said before, the very slippery slope of, every interaction between two people somehow could end up being a sexual harassment or a harassment issue. I think it needs to be better defined, and it needs to be legally defined. And I'm not hearing that as well. I know, unfortunately, Dr. Bobb had started when she had a problem on the phone, and she didn't get to finish, in my view, her definition. But I think that needs to be done. That's all I really want to add for now. Thank you so very much for giving me the opportunity.
Panelists, do you agree, disagree with them, that the issue of unwanted should be removed?
Well, I think,
And not objective. Yes, you were saying, Jermaine?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I think, my stance on it. If we go down this rabbit hole where every single thing that you do is unwanted or unwarranted or on this or on that, I mean, where does it stop? I made the point, and I made the point again. I agree wholeheartedly in principle of what the college just said. I agree in part with what Dr. Bobb previously said. All right, but I want to give a story here very quickly. I have a son who's 4 years old.
Because we have another caller on the line.
No problem. I'll say quickly. I have a son who's 4 years old, and from the day that boy was born up until now, and even when he goes on to 18, 19, whatever, I, as a parent, I let my son know when he's doing something right or when he's doing something wrong. And I ensure that he follows my directions. Now, gone are days in Barbados when a village could raise a child, because now everything is some form of abuse. So I just want to make the point here, when people talk about legislation has stopped teachers from disciplining children. It has also stopped neighbors from telling young boys that they're wrong, but it allows those same young boys to end up in prison and get harassed by men. So let us talk about legislation very carefully and think about the effects of over-legislating.
Okay, caller, good night to you.
Hello, good night to the host and good night to the panel.
Good night, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes, I have noticed in Barbados that if a male shows aggression to a female, whether it be physical, verbal, or psychological, they're quick to cry foul, they're quick to cry harassment, and they're even quick to call the police. On the other hand, I find that females can be extremely aggressive and even violent to other females, and I find that women are far quieter and more tolerant. I personally know of lesbian relationships where women have battered other women, and I mean, they don't even call the police. I know of a case, for instance, where a friend of mine went into Bridgetown, and she came home and told me about 20 different women attacked her. You look so nice and so on, right? I find that this whole thing about targeting men whenever a man has to approach a woman and claim that he's harassment, I suspect it's all part of a kind of feminist satanic agenda, you know. And I personally suspect that this whole thing is part of a satanic move to challenge God's creative order. Because, for instance, when you observe nature, I mean, it is clear that the male, the lions, the bears, even the Bajan falcons, the males actually are the dominant partners in relationships. And I think this move to usurp and challenge it really is unwholesome and has its basis in Satanism. That's my contribution for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Ronelle, I'm going to get straight to you because I saw the expression on your face.
Any time. There's a lot to unpack, to be honest, a lot to unpack, and I it's hard to know where to begin. First of all, I want to begin with why why men feel to approach women on their time. Like, I'm going about my day, I'm trying to run errands, I'm trying to go to work, I'm a child just trying to get to school, and a man is approaching me, saying things to me, trying to get my attention, and I, we have the right to just go about our day, our business, without any interaction. I mean, just go about your day to just complete your tasks or get where you're going without having to take into consideration the fact that a man wants to approach you and talk to you. And men understand cues, as one of the callers spoke about. They understand physical cues. They understand when nonverbal cues, when a woman is uninterested or they don't want this attention. Because very quickly, when they see a woman's reaction, she has not said anything, but they're ready to lambaste her because she's not responding in the way that they anticipated. That she's not gleeful about the fact that they approached her. And I think it's very disingenuous to paint it as, these women are just, putting the feminist agenda and that they're not calling out other forms of harassment. I'm calling out the type of harassment that affects me. I'm talking about, something that is affecting me, that's affecting the way that I navigate the country, the way how, this type of violence has impacted my life and the life of other women.
Okay.
So
we have another caller on the line. Good night to you.
All right, good night. Good night, all. I just want to join with you all and say I don't condone harassment in any sort of way. Unfortunately, as I would say that I was wanting to stay silent rather than call out if it would happen in front of me, like Ronald would have said the men would have done. I think that's something that we can explore, in terms of how men view each other doing that kind of stuff. The caller before, not that one, but the one previous to that one that spoke about some subjectivity as it relates to, men going after women in a way of like flirting or trying to win the women's approval. Women may play hard to get or whatever, and just that's how a lot of relationships are formed. So I find that very interesting the way he said that. What I want to do is to throw another dimension into the mix. As it relates to harassment on the street, what some would say catcalling. There's a situation where sometimes women may baffle other women. But I can't say Peter makes baffle Paul, how so like Pauline makes baffle Teresa, or rather where some women may carry themselves in a way, dress themselves in a way that then will want to attract the likes of men in some way. So I do think that some women put themselves in that position to get the attention of men. And then it's for men not to decipher, who is that the way that I should relate to her, or is that the way I should relate to all women? I don't think it's the right way, but I do think that some women go there. Maybe that's how they were, how they came up, how they grew up to put themselves out there, to seek to get approval. But I do think that it is subjective in that way. But one of the things I would say, though, is that I think another issue that we may need to look at is the objectivity of women, and not maybe just harassment, because I think harassment comes down to objectivity. I know we would have been introduced to a lot of things on TV, movies, internet, in terms of looking at women in particular ways, and I think that may be another issue that we may need to see as a culture. Why do we see these? Why do we treat women in this kind of way?
Okay, the
Can I
question
respond
was,
to that, Paula?
yes, sure, go ahead. And then I'll go to
Okay,
Dr.
all right.
Bobb because I'm sure she has a bit to say as well.
Okay. Well, firstly, I want to say that I want to debunk what that Paula just said about a woman dressed in a certain way so she can get harassed. I don't agree with that foolishness. Um, Men and women need to be adults. Because someone dresses some way doesn't mean that they have to be harassed or that they're seeking to be harassed by anyone. So I want to debunk that straight and foremost. What I also want to add in this discussion, the caller spoke about outside influences. But we got in the Caribbean, we have the influences of carnival. And it is very interesting because men who ordinarily could not talk to most women 364 days of the year. On Grand Kaduma Day, they find themselves all up on the woman and they think it is okay, right? And for some reason, they get a pass. And in this society, we promote that as being normalized, right? Now, I want to say that if we want to go all in, we have to we have to let our males and females know, look, this behavior, rather it be a Rapova, it be coming through Fox News, it be coming through CBC, Facebook, whatever, it is wrong, right? We cannot be selective in what is harassment and when harassment takes place. We have to, as I said, it must be an all-government approach, it must be an all-country approach. It must start from in the homes. Even if it is a single parent, mother or father raising that child, it is that parent's responsibility to ensure that that child has the correct values instilled in it. The reality is that in society, all sorts of things will be said. But when you sit down, you study the fact that you have up to 2/3 or 3/4 of the time on a daily basis with your child, then you have the biggest influence on your child. And as a parent within the home, you can make a definite decision. So when I hear women saying that men this and men that, if you are a single mother, you are raising your child, you are doing the correct thing, then you know what? Your child will come out good. And if your child doesn't do something that is right, then you as a parent have to take responsibility.
Okay, when we come back after the commercial break, I want to hear from Dr. Bobb not only about the last caller, about the issue of what he terms to be inappropriate styling in dress, but also to the issue of the female on female harassment as well. We'll be right back with the People's Business. Welcome back to our viewers. And as I said before we left off, we're going to go straight to Dr. Bobb from the UWI Gender Center. Okay, Dr. Bobb, if I could have you weigh in on those two issues, the issue of dress and the female-on-female harassment.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm going to go a little bit further because there are some comments I want to say, but I'll be brief, I'll be succinct. Um, I'm just wondering, I'm sitting here and I'm smiling and I'm thinking to myself, why don't men want women to have the same human right as they have? Why is that so hard for men to want? Why do we think that living in fear, having someone constantly intrude your space, define when you go out, when you come in, where you walk, how you dress, why do we think that is okay for women, but it's not okay for men? And why should men be the one to do that? When we're talking about dress, that is taking responsibility completely away from the perpetrator and completely away from the act. And that is where we need to focus. So when we're thinking about this unwanted behavior, we're talking about legislation. This unwanted behavior is a violation of one's human rights. And forgive me because I had to make notes. I have notes written down all over, so many comments coming in. And it's a violation of your human right to safety. And if we think back, it's something that is
Okay, Dr. Bobb, we're getting some freezing there from your net on that end. But we were talking about a violation of rights. And I want to deal first with Jermaine and then also with Ronelle about this issue. I'll be back with you in a moment, Dr. Bobb. Yes, Jermaine, are our rights being violated?
You mean in the context of, could you repeat that? Sorry?
Of the issues that we just spoke to, where he's bringing up the issue of how we dress, etc. But we're not seeing it as a person's right to do just that, dress as they wish. And for you to say that because you dress that way, I'll harass you, is a violation of my right to dress as I please.
Yeah, you have the right to dress however you want. If you don't want all clothes, that's also your right. But the reality is, as I said previously, regardless of what a woman has on or doesn't have on, it doesn't give any man the right, man or woman, the right to harass that female. She has the right to traverse freely across Barbados, right, and expect a level of safety, accommodation, and all of the constitutional guarantees which were afforded to us in the 1966 Constitution of Barbados. So I would say, in essence, yes, your rights are being violated. But another thing I also want to bring up here quickly in this conversation, there are times when, and I want to speak specifically on the female or male harassment. There are females in this country who give men unwarranted attention. And regardless of what the men do, they come and they come and they come. And there's this whole thing about men being macho and you don't want to show fear or whatever it is. But the reality is sometimes some females also have to know when to step back. As you're talking about harassment being the catcall and that sort of stuff. But what about females who text men unwantedly? What about females who probably do things for men that they don't want them to do? I mean, these are all forms of harassment. And as I said, a person messaged me and said that we need more emotionally intelligent men in society, but I think we need more emotionally intelligent men and women. And we need persons to understand that wrong is wrong and right is right. And regardless of how the outside world tries to paint it differently, wrong will always be wrong and right will always be right.
But I think that you should look at it from a more fair stance, in that the situation with women receiving pics of males' anatomies on their phones, males that they never knew had their number, far outweighs the amount of women who will send said pics.
You might be amazed what is happening to men in society right now. But I mean, I'm not going to discount what is happening to the women, but I want to make a point that the discussion and must be fair, and there must be a realization that just as women are harassed in this country, men are equally harassed, sometimes to extreme levels. And the funny thing is that when men go to the Royal Barbados Police Force and say, listen, you're being harassed, you're locked out of the station. No one wants to take this seriously. And this is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Pardon? Okay, can we go to Ronelle, because this is what your movement, Life in Leggins, is all about. Oh, okay. Unfortunately, one of our panelists has dropped out of the Zoom. Dr. Bobb, before we went off, you had a train of thought you were on there about rights and the fact that they should be afforded to all and sundry. But I want to pick you up on something here that you keep mentioning, and that is the harassment of our girls. And it is something that I find when I walk the streets personally is becoming more and more prevalent. Our children are developing at a much faster rate. Our girls are beginning to look like women before their time. That's not their fault in terms of their biological maturity. But what can we really get for men to understand that because you think this person looks right, that they should attempt to pick the fruit?
So that's again comes back to this men's practice of sexualizing women and sexualizing girls, and our beliefs and our practices, and not having the kinds of protection that girls need. Um, when it comes to these issues of harassment, we talk about, you mentioned it, girls are right. Is What does that mean? Why are you defining or labeling their body in any way? And why is that your business? Why can't you close your eyes or look away or control your own impulses? Do not be harassing the girls. Do not be calling them. Do not be thinking that you have the right to approach them in any way because you are a man and they're a girl. We need to be able to, our girls need to be protected. Our girls need to feel safe in the spaces that they're in, whether it's on public transport or just walking in from school or anywhere. And so this goes back to the whole narrative about how the person is dressed um, tends to attract a man's attention. Our girls are in school uniforms, different school uniforms, and different girls from different schools have this similar experience of men approaching them in a sexualized way. That narrative has to change, and I think men need to understand that they don't have the right over a woman's body, over anybody else's body. They
But
need
you
to
know,
understand.
Dr. Bobb, another narrative that is coming very clear from the background into the foreground is that same harassment of our girls also by women. They are women who are aware of a child's socioeconomic circumstance, and they might be in a position to provide, to persuade, to offer, and they go after them the same way. And it gets to a point whereby some of these girls are weighed down either by the pressure or by the fact that there may be no one to tell them, well, maybe this is not how you want to be, etc. Is it any more right for females to do it to other women?
Absolutely not. That is a violation of their right. Any kind of unwanted sexual advancement or kind of behavior is wrong. It's not right, whether you are a man or a woman in that case. And this is why we talk about having legislation. But also we need the communities involved. We need our communities to be able to speak up when they see certain things happening. And if you notice that there's a young girl who's being pursued by a man or by a woman about anything, speak up about it. And if you can't speak to the perpetrator, then you can basically ask that young girl, how are you doing? Are you okay? Walk with them until they get to a safe space. Talk to them so that, that attention diverts. We need to be able to provide some kind of services, some kind of protection for our young children, our young
Yes.
girls in particular, from both men and women. But when we do look at the statistics and we do look at what is taking place, most of the kinds of gateway crime, criminal offenses that arise from sexual harassment on our girls come from men. The issue of
Okay.
other forms of physical harm, yeah,
All
more
right.
serious
We
forms.
are going
Can
to
I
go to
interject here
commercial.
quickly?
Just a second. We're going to go to
Okay.
commercial break. And when we come back, we'll be doing our wrap up. So feel free to include your interjection in your final takeaway points before we end this evening's program. With me, Mr. Jermaine Beckford and Dr. Danielle Bobb. Unfortunately, Ronelle King has dropped out. We'll be right back. We want to welcome back our viewers. We'll go straight to the call lines. Good evening to you.
Hi, good evening, Ms. Burke. I wanted to address on the narrative raised earlier by the men's representative in terms of, we're moving to a space in society where we are no longer able to tell the difference between, harassment, checking in on the girl or attention, and we have these laws in place which I think he suggested is criminalizing men for, the average behavior in terms of pursuing a young lady. I have significant challenges with that narrative because what we are failing to address, and I think one of the callers raised it as well, what we're failing to address is that we have a culture that supports, in some instances, the harassment of women, and it's been normalized to some extent to come from men. When we look at that one folk song, "Every Time I Come Down Here, They Trouble Me," we learned that from historical times, this has been the practice of men in our society in terms of harassing and going after young women, and whatever you want to call it, whatever it may look like, you may not feel it is, but in the instance that the woman feels abused, uncomfortable, then it is harassment. And the legislation will only be covering to the extent that women need to be protected from men in society who are treating to them in this way. And I think another area that was addressed, and I think the narrative was incorrect, is the suggestion that men and women are experiencing harassment at an equal rate. That is simply not true, and we have statistics that can show that. I mean, the fact remains that women disproportionately are being affected, and when you see women who are being murdered in Barbados, more often than not, it's resulting from a domestic dispute and at the hands of a male spouse. Now, those are the conversations we need to have and not spew incorrect narratives in terms of, men and women are experiencing harassment equally, or saying that, men are simply pursuing women for relationship purposes when it is an act of harassment. So because it has been accepted over the years as, culture, this is how, men should pursue women. This is how boys should pursue girls. You like the girl, don't talk to her. We say things like, if he's throwing things at you, that means he likes you. We need to change that narrative and accept that we need to teach our young boys and our young men that there's a way to pursue a girl that you're interested in, and there's a way that's simply not correct. That is the conversation we need to have.
Thank you, caller. Since Ronelle is just joining us back, I'll let you respond to that, caller.
I completely agree with what you said. I don't think there's more like it's completely inaccurate to paint a narrative that when violence against women and violence against men is happening at the same rate. Women are disproportionately affected, and as you see, even when we began the program spoke about homophobic harassment as well, and the main perpetrators of that are men again. So we need to be having these conversations with men and boys and older men in society, because I think there's another problematic thing that we say that we're waiting for the older generation to kind of die out, and expecting that they think it's going to die out with them. They pass it on to their children, their grandchildren, and it continues and perpetuates within society. So we need to engage and at all levels.
Okay, when you went off with your technical issue, we were talking about the issue of style and how people carry themselves. And that is at the center of your movement, the Life in Leggins. And only this weekend, someone raised the issue of a female being out in a pair of leggings, and they were saying that the individual frequents the establishment, never wears anything but leggings, and then because the men speak to how she looks in them, she curses at them. And if she didn't want them noticing her in the first instance, she wouldn't wear them.
But harassment has nothing to do with what you're wearing. If you speak to women, women would tell you that they've been harassed in dresses to their ankles. Pregnant women are harassed. Muslim women wearing full burqa, hijab have been harassed. Babies, children, girls in school uniform. It has to use clothing as a excuse as to why this is happening, or to place the blame or the onus on the woman to change. It's not going to stop the harassment because it has nothing to do with the clothing.
Ronelle, and this might be Jermaine's area, because you were mentioning that men seem to be being harassed more than we know. There's this thing that some women have now about a man in a pair of gray sweatpants.
Well, I've never heard it, but what I'll say is this. I fully accept that women are harassed in Barbados. That is not in question. What is in question is the amount of men who are harassed and do not report it, or who, if they do report it, they're laughed out of the police station. These are things which are happening in Barbados. In workplaces, there are a lot of males, and I can tell from workplaces where I've worked, where males were sexually harassed. And when they tried to complain or say, look, the female manager doing this to me, or the things which women would find as abhorrent, these men were ridiculed. Oh, you're not a real man. A man you shouldn't wear with that. All these are comments, right? So I just want to say that we need to teach our boys and our girls, our mothers and our fathers, that, believe it or not, because this society has been hypersexualized and we have this level of victim shaming at times, and also women are predominantly seen as the weaker sex. There are women in Barbados in positions of power. There are women in Barbados who have physical strength, who sexually and other ways harass men. But because the poor men cannot bring themselves to either complain, or if they do, they're laughed at even by some of their friends on the block. It happens, and then we go along with the narrative that it predominantly happens to women. And I want to bring some balance to the discussion as part of my contribution here tonight, and leave this with the public out there, that men in Barbados go through sometimes just as much harassment, and all of the different things that happen to women, they happen to men. The challenges,
I beg to differ there, Jermaine, because I don't think half as many men have been raped as women have.
Or killed by women. You find more women killed by men.
Mm-hmm. Of course,
well, I can't dispute those statistics on the rapes or the murders. But what about the men who are raped in their households by women and don't report it? Come on. I remember there was a story that I heard years ago of this guy when I was growing up, who was raped by a woman, savagely raped. And when he went to the police station, the policeman laughed at him, and then he had to go back, and then finally they took him serious. And if you saw the guy, he was a big muscle man, and I was like, what? Oh, he could get raped by a woman? How a woman can rape a man? But it happened to him, and it happens to other young boys in this society. It also happens to women in this society who are raped by women. So I'm not going to discredit what is happening to the women because it is abhorrent, it's wrong. Any sort of harassment is wrong. But let us be real here that men in this country face some of the very same circumstances, and we must give kudos and credit to those men, and we must also, the same way that we want to sympathize and find movements and legislation and all that sort of stuff to help the women, we also have to help our young boys because they are our children too.
It is true. It is very true, Jermaine Beckford. I want to come to you, Dr. Bobb, because Jermaine kept mentioning something, the teaching and the socialization. Where do we move from here? We are at the point where we know we're being harassed. What can we do to turn this tide? How can an organization such as the Nita Barrow unit, the Gender Studies Department, how can you all help us with reacculturing our population?
So we have been doing a lot of work so far in this area. We've been working with non-governmental organizations, we've been working with the government, we've been working across the board to assist in putting on training and workshops. I know my colleagues recently did a curriculum for gender-based violence to be included in the human and family life curriculum for the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we are working on a lot of issues on advocacy, on different projects to bring across this change. And we understand that it's not just about socialization, it's also about having state and structural changes as well, and helping persons to kind of relearn what they've accepted all these years as being okay and right.
Okay. We are coming close to the end. So if I can have some parting words, I will go to Jermaine Beckford next, of the head of Projects Men's Empowerment Network Support. What are your two takeaways, Jermaine?
My two takeaways to the public out there, I would say, listen, we must respect our women, but equally respect our men. And, I just want to say, coming from the men's organization, we do not condone any form of harassment. And we also, I don't know if I could do some free advertising here, but we hold a session.
You want your last shot so we can get to Ronelle. Ronelle, your parting words?
So basically, I just wanted to say, going forward, we need to have these open and honest conversations among ourselves and among and when we see these types of harassment, happening, we need to condemn it straight up and, again, engage the person in a way for them to understand that this is unwanted, this is not the way that they should be conducting themselves, and that on the other end of the spectrum, the person who's on the receiving end, how it impacts them, because it is not just, they don't like it, it impacts them long term, and the way how they navigate these spaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. So you've been viewing the People's Business. We've been looking at harassment, especially harassment against women. Dr. Daniele Bobb, lecturer for the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit, Ronelle King, the Director of Life in Leggins, and Jermaine Beckford, Head of Projects with the Men's Empowerment Network Support. Well, you've heard it here. The legislation is being changed, yes, but we also need a change in attitude, a change in culture, and a change in the way we see each other. That's been The People's Business. Do have a good night. I'm Wendy Burke.